All right, welcome back. Well, delving right into this one, as you've seen there, we've got Comrade Joe Ajero joining us this morning. He's the Vice President of Nigeria Labour Congress. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. So, just shed some light. Yeah, what is Labour? Yes, there's going to be a strike, but could you explain what about?
Well, the further correction, I am the Deputy President of the NLC. Labour is worried on the anti-people's bill of removing labor from the legislative, minimum wage from the legislative list to the concurrent list in the 1999 Constitution as amended. The issue of minimum wage, Nigeria, ratified the convention in 1961. And then it was only in 1981 that the Shagari government, signed it into law. And it has been on up to now. But at various National Assembly sittings or various National Assembly groups, you discover that you see one or two anti-progressive legislators who attempt, by doing the bidding of the governor, to make sure they remove labor from the exclusive list to the legislative, to the concurrent list. And what that means is that they want to so decentralize the issue of industrial relations and collective bargaining, which is against the ILO conventions and all known laws, enacted in this country. So that is the problem that Labour is having. The governors, having pocketed the various houses of assemblies, want to pocket Labour, want to even pocket the National Assembly by sponsoring bills through their representatives in the National Assembly. And this definitely will be resisted because this is a product of negotiation, this is a product of struggle. Even the minimum wage, the National Assembly were represented, the governors were represented, representatives of organized labor, organized private sector were there, and it was a product of collective bargaining. And all of them, made inputs to this extent. For a governor to now sponsor a member of the House of Rep from his constituency and is calling on the other governors to help him to lobby to make sure that this bill, is passed into law, the Nigerian workers will resist it and will continue to resist it.
Okay, Comrade Ajero, now you've detailed decades that this provision has been on for. In looking at such, people try to weigh the merits and demerits, the pros and cons, especially for labor, because this is essentially about labor. So if you were to weigh it, against each other, the pros and cons, the merits versus demerits, would you say that this provision, this minimum wage provision, has made labor better off over the decades or otherwise? If it has, in what way?
Well, I think if you look at where we are coming from, and there's a nation that is still underdeveloping, an underdeveloping nation, you will agree with me that even with the law, most governors have been, underpaying up to this extent. If there is no law, on this issue of minimum wage, and remember, the minimum wage is not a living wage in the country today. You will see governors that will pay 5,000 naira a month. Now, there would be no provision, there will be no standard, there will be no benchmark. The issue of minimum wage does not say governors should pay exactly that amount, but is providing a benchmark, that they should pay higher than. And I want to tell you, as of today, majority of them have not even been able to pay this, starvation wage. And if this law was not in place, if this kind of guideline and benchmark was not in place, I bet you, most Nigerians will not even be paid 5,000 a month. Let me even tell you further. Some states are not even paying. Some states, workers are owed 4 months, 5 months, despite the existence of these laws. You can now see that it is a place that, those that are in charge are seeing it as, they have to lord it over us. Now, come to think of it, the governors and the House of Rep members and even councillors nationwide are paying the same wage. Now, if you are decentralizing minimum wage, why will a member of the National Assembly not earn minimum wage? Why must his wage not be regulated? No, I think it will be worse off if there's no law. If there's no law that if you commit murder, you'll be killed or you'll be jailed, I tell you that none of us will be alive today. There will be killing spree all over.
So, Mr. Jerry, you're saying then, because we just heard you say some of those states haven't been able to pay, does that suggest their capacity? Because some would see from that angle saying, look, doesn't that then say that they don't have the capacity to pay and that's why they are seeking for it to be decentralized?
Well, their capacity was put into consideration during the negotiation. Because all the governors, they had their representatives from the various geopolitical zones that were at the negotiating table. And that was why the minimum wage is even being considered at 30,000. Some states have capacity to pay 100,000. Some have capacities to pay 50,000. But there was consideration based on the list, based on their revenue. And then that was how the consideration was made, and 30,000 was considered. In fact, some of us were expecting some governors to have implemented 50,000. Some of them said they were going to pay 55,000 during the course of negotiation. And now for them now to be dragging others down, when it was 18,000, states like Edo, then the Comrade governor was there, said they were going to pay 25,000, and they were paying it. That was the spirit behind the minimum wage law and negotiation. Labour didn't insist on a particular figure. They considered the ability to pay of these other states and reached at a conclusion. But when they don't get their priority right, when you have a situation, they appoint 100 of aides, SAs, special assistant on this and that, then there will be, the wage bill will be high. And when you have such a wage bill, we'll be funding the incompetence of most of those chief executives. And when you do that, they will now be talking about their ability to pay or ability not to pay. I think that's what is what is the issue.
Perhaps the contention here is the understanding of what the whole concept is about. As you said, it's minimum wage. Which means that that's the least any state should be able to pay. But then perhaps the expectation was that Labour should be able to have conversations with the various states, just as you have said. Edo, in time past, paid more than the minimum wage, and that have the ability. But they don't also forget that there are states, just as you have said, that do not have the capacity to pay. And you have said it, some of them are owing 4 months, 5 months. So the consideration then would be, as an effective manager, shouldn't you be the one to have negotiations with the people who work for you, as opposed to someone else negotiating for the salaries of your staff on your behalf?
Well, look at the way it goes. A minimum standard is set because you can't be allowed to negotiate without any standard, without any guideline. And that's very clear. A minimum standard of 30,000 was set, and the various governors were urged to meet with Labour in their states to look at the formula for implementation. Some have agreed on 31, some 32, trying to be conservative. And then the issue of ability to pay you are talking about and revenue is not the issue, because that was put into consideration at the process of negotiation. But when you get your priority wrong, when you depend on revenue coming from federal allocation alone, and then you do nothing, to raise revenue in your area, these are the kind of excuses that we'll continue to have. I don't think that there's any state that can pay 30,000 minimum wage. Remember, the workforce in all the states is not the same. And that there's no way you can equally pay discriminatory wages in the country. You will at the same time be violating Section 15, 4 of the Constitution, which equally allows you to make sure that you provide, happiness and sense of belonging, to all manner of all the people in the country, so that loyalty, to the federation will be higher than loyalty to the units. And then if you now pay, and this equally goes contrary to Section 17E of the Constitution, which says equal pay for equal work. So how do you determine it if I'm a level 4 officer that is teaching in primary school in Imo State, and another one in Kaduna, and one is earning 30,000, another one is earning 5,000? This can't stand in the present circumstance.
Well, you haven't factored in, comrade, or perhaps maybe I haven't gotten it, the fact that the economic viability of the different states, differ. The capacity of the purchasing power in each state differs, and consequently, the negotiations that the workers should be having with their principals should also be put into consideration here, because even if you buy, a bottle of soft drink at a particular price here in Lagos, I don't know if it's the same thing in other parts of the world, in other parts of the country. The buying power, for instance, in Borno or in Bauchi will definitely be different from what you have in Port Harcourt or Oka. So have you also factored that in, given that, so that it's not like we're only speaking for workers without giving consideration to the challenges that the managers of the states have to contend with?
Analogy, because what we discovered is that if we go into the concept of, cost of living index, we will not come out of this analysis you are trying to go into, because cost of coke in Borno could be higher, and is even higher than in Lagos or Port Harcourt. Cost of fuel in those areas that they tend to pay less is higher than the states that have more revenue. So and all these things we are put into consideration. And I need to say this: cost of transportation in most of those states seem to be higher than even in Abuja and other areas. So there's no uniformity in that. And when you have such an economic situation in the country, you have to put them into consideration to agree on the least minimum. That is what we're talking about.
You haven't also factored in this one.
I don't want us to look at
in this index that you are looking at, you haven't factored in the fact that cost of accommodation in the states also differ. Cost of food in these states also differ. So if we evaluate some of these items that you mentioned, some may be luxury and some may not be luxury. Well, yes. I mean, so if in balancing the analysis, maybe you want to factor that in as well?
Cost of fuel all over, is almost the same thing, and some places higher. And these were not the considerations, you are talking of. But these considerations were brought, all these economic indices were brought, to the negotiating table. The government representatives, Ministry of Labor, people from presidency, the governors, they came before we agreed. That wasn't our demand. Our demand was more than 55,000 naira minimum wage. And after all these considerations, we now arrived at 30,000 naira minimum wage. So I don't know why we should be dragged there, unless you want to put a permanent reopener clause, so that we'll be reviewing this in every month. If the cost of fuel changes in any particular state, we change it. But if we brought all these things to the table and agreed on a figure, and maybe we agree for 2-3 years so that these issues will be reviewed, I don't think this is the time for us to now go back to it. They were signatories to the agreement. They all agreed to it. And then until the time for another negotiation, which is maybe 3-4 years, it will be wrong halfway to go and do a kind of legislative coup to now say you remove it from here, you put it here.
Okay. Comrade, quite interesting clause, the reopener clause. And I know at this point all options may be on the table just to ensure we resolve this issue. So let's see if we can also diagnose some of the challenges being faced with this current minimum wage regime. So ever since the president signed it into law in 2019, just how many states have not been able to pay that 30,000 naira minimum wage?
Well, it is more or less how many states, have decided not to pay because of maybe, according to them, COVID-19. And the driving force of labor, to have implemented it in the presence of this COVID-19 pandemic has been, at a low ebb, where everybody is even sitting at home. Now, it makes it difficult. Some states, in good faith, have started implementing, but many of them, and I repeat, many of them are hiding under this issue of COVID-19, and that is why you see them, praying that this will continue so that they will not be engaged, on this issue of minimum wage payment. And that is equally why some of them, like I said, are not paying, but they are attending to some other needs, and which to them is their priority. So from 2019 to date, Nigeria has been on a kind of whether total or partial lockdown, created by the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is a wrong period to assess the level of compliance and the level at which labor was able to drive compliance in all these areas. That is why I will tell you that, the number of states that have paid, who have acted in good faith to pay, is not higher than the number that have not paid.
Okay, well, Comrade, I think it will still be significant to have at least a figure to that, because whether we like it or not, we're operating in context of COVID-19, even though I find it very interesting. I see some states are praying for the pandemic to continue. But just help us have a sense, really, of the figure. How many states have been reneging on that 30,000 naira minimum wage?
Well, I would not, critically about 9 states, are chronic about it. Not just that they are reneging, they are fighting, against the implementation. And then the other states, some have started implementation, but some of them in defects. So if you started implementation and then 1 month or 2 months you didn't pay, some started implementation by just paying those ones on the lowest 30,000, and then in other areas maybe they add 500 or 1,000, which does not, tally with the spirit and the letters of the Minimum Wage Act.
Okay, so let's say about 27 states are paying the minimum wage, according to you. So before now, when it was 18,000...
No, that would be too high.
Oh, so what is the figure then?
That would be too high. It's in the neighborhood of 17.
17, okay.
That you say are compliant, yeah.
Okay. All right, so just one more figure I need you to give me. So when it was 18,000, how many states were not paying?
Well, when it was 18,000, I think Zamfara and maybe 2-3 states, were not paying. And then before it was increased, if paying is, they have signed the agreement and they're paying, but when you pay 1 month and you don't pay another month, we equally consider this, that you are not paying in full. But in most instances, even if you put it at 5,000 naira minimum wage, states must owe. It's like it's habitual. If you put it at 1,000, when minimum wage was 300, they were still owing. So I think it's a matter of priority, and getting the right things done.
Okay, so it will seem you're saying that there are state governments that don't have workers or labor as their priority, and that's a huge concern because these are the people that drive the government in the civil service. In fact, the private sector is also involved. So for labor, just briefly, just what kind of interaction, what kind of interface have you been having with those state governments, and what have they been saying is wrong? What have they been given as a reason for them not paying?
Well, some of them is all about might. You will remember quite vividly the incident that happened between Labour and the Rivers State government. It took a kind of a strong action that all of us had to go to Rivers State to confront whatever the problem was then, for the Rivers State government to start payment, and then even leave the secretariat of the NLC in the state. Now, when they display this power, and that is what the Imo State governor is doing now, as of today, he has moved in with police to seal the secretariat of the NLC in the state. Labour from even at the national level went there, met with him, and agreed on a joint committee and other issues, which up to today, is a case of might. He's using might. Maybe before long, we'll pay him a courtesy visit, and we'll see how to resolve this issue. So when they use might, some of them use might, take over, some will even harass some of our leaders, and then that's the military mentality that some of them are still having. For those of them that will prefer to engage the workers and their leaders, we're achieving good results with them.
Moment, Labour just wants this bill to be removed. Don't even consider it any further, and then let it stay the way it is. But then if you remember, part of the arguments that made the rounds at the time when this negotiation was going on, when that tripartite committee was on, some of the governors had thought, well, look, we need more funds. If they can have a lot more funds coming to the states, maybe the federal government receiving a lot less than it is receiving now, that may make it a little better. Would you consider that an option?
Well, I think to a very large extent, the federal government, they have their role. The governors have their role. Just if you look at the various arms of government and their roles assigned to them in Section 4, 5, 6 of the Constitution, you know that even the state governments have the right to even drive their own revenue. And you equally know that most of them are doing that, and they're doing perfectly well. For those of them that see the federal government as a place you go and collect rent, they will continue to, complain, to argue. If they have to, work on the revenue sharing formula again, I don't think that, they should make it open. And then it goes through the normal process on the issue of revenue sharing. And then you equally look at the assignments given to the federal government and the role given to the state governments. Now, if you look at them and you balance it, you can rework on the revenue sharing formula of the various organs of government. But to just sit down and say, give us more money, give us more money, we have to find out your responsibility so that we can match it with your allocation at the same time. And I think it should take a law for that to come into force.
Just a quick one, comrade. This protest starting today, is it only about this minimum wage bill, or are there other components?
Well, minimum wage bill, the establishment of state judicial councils, and the hoarding of, petroleum products, by various filling stations, the gas, to increase the prices of petroleum products. These are the three key issues.
Hoarding?
Well, I'm wondering, at what point, did that even come into the fray? Hoarding of petroleum products?
Yeah, you may not notice it maybe in the areas of Lagos. In Abuja, it's hard. Most of the filling stations just closed. They're not selling. And people were selling even 500 naira per liter.
Yeah, shouldn't it be about the price? Is it about the price or about hoarding the product?
Both. Hoarding the product was meant to achieve, a higher price, and then to enable them pay. If you watch, there was a meeting and negotiation between government and labor. Okay. And government had been insisting that they want to increase.
Okay. Well, resisting it. Okay, just a very quick one, comrade, because we know that you have to run. In the 80s, the government of the day said, you know what, we can't pay this, so we needed to take workers. We needed to retrench workers. That mass retrenchment happened at the time. What if governors also decide that if you insist that we pay, we need to let some workers go?
That's a threat. And it's not in the light of what is happening and the economic realities of the moment. If with the security situation in the country, if you attempt, to, evacuate so many workers from workplace, I'll tell you that nobody will be safe. Let me take you further to the 80s, to 70s. It was in the same country, Nigeria, that me and you are living in today, that a government and a responsive government said, hey, wait a minute, we're going to give you an Udoja Award. And they now paid people what was then called Udoja Award. And I met some workers, to breathe, the air of very good fresh air. And they continue. Some of them were able to build their houses and do some other things. So it must not be in the same negative perspective. We had experienced windfall, oil windfall in this country and other areas. And the monies were squandered. So to think of let us retrench, and they will have us to contend with. Because you retrench them, and the governors must equally be retrenched, and the parliamentarians. Why are we going to have that number of people in the National Assembly, in the state assemblies, and we are not talking of reducing them or retrenching them, and it's just the worker receiving maybe 30,000 or less that will have to talk of retrenchment? Then they are calling for, a kind of engagement, and we engage them.
All right. I guess you got your answer now. Well, we thank you for coming out this morning. Comrade Joe Ajero is the Deputy President of the NLC. Well, back in a moment. Join us again.